Hey guys, tonight we drift softly into a place that no longer exists, and yet somehow never truly left us. A place made of stone and sun and sea wind, of quiet footsteps echoing down long corridors, of hands stained with ink and dust. Tonight, we wander into the shadowed halls of the Library of Alexandria. Settle in now. Let your breathing slow. Let the noise of the day soften and fade. If you enjoy these long, wandering journeys through history, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Somewhere, night has already fallen. Somewhere else, the sun is just beginning to rise. History stretches across all of it, patient and unhurried. Tonight's story is not about flames, not really. It's about what happens when they never arrive. What happens when fragile scrolls are spared from smoke? When whispers written in ink are allowed to keep whispering? Imagine, for a moment, the soft lap of the Mediterranean against the harbor walls. The smell of salt and papyrus carried on a warm breeze. Oil lamps glowing like small, steady stars as scholars work late into the night. The world is quieter here, slower. This is a place built for thinking and for remembering. As we begin, allow the modern world to slip gently away. No screens, no clocks, just the long breath of centuries passing. We are going to walk through an alternate path of time, one where knowledge was not scattered to the winds, but gathered, protected, and patiently expanded. We won't rush. We won't leap too far ahead. We will move the way history often does in reality, step by careful step, guided by human curiosity and the soft persistence of questions that refuse to die. The Library of Alexandria stands before us now, not as a ruin or a myth, but as a living place. Marble columns catch the golden light of afternoon. Shadows stretch across tiled floors. Somewhere, a scribe coughs softly and turns a page. Somewhere else, a philosopher pauses, staring out toward the sea, wondering how far it stretches, and whether anyone has ever truly reached its edge. And in this version of history, the answers to those questions will not be lost. The story begins long before any imagined fire. It begins with a hunger to know everything. The Ptolemies, rulers of Egypt after Alexander the Great, inherited more than a kingdom. They inherited a dream. Alexander himself, young and restless, had wanted a city that could bind the world together, not just through trade and conquest, but through ideas. Alexandria rose from the sand with that ambition woven into its foundations. Wide streets, busy ports, a lighthouse so tall it seemed to touch the sky, and at its heart, the Mauseon, the home of the muses, where the library would grow. Scrolls arrived from everywhere. Ships docking in the harbor were searched, not for contraband, but for books. Originals were taken, copied with care, and sometimes kept, while copies were returned. Athens sent philosophy, Babylon sent astronomy. India sent mathematics carried by traders and travelers. Egypt contributed its ancient wisdom, older than memory itself. Each scroll was a fragile bridge across distance and time. Now imagine that this process never truly stops. No sudden destruction, no slow neglect. Instead, careful stewardship. Generations of librarians who understand the value of preservation. papyrus stored away from damp air, ink formulas refined to last longer, catalogues updated and re-updated, not forgotten in dusty corners, but actively used. Knowledge here is not static. It breathes. Euclid walks these halls, not as a name in a textbook, but as a living man, patiently explaining geometry to students who sit cross-legged on cool stone floors. His elements are not merely written once and copied imperfectly across centuries. They are debated, annotated, corrected. Small errors are caught early. Alternative proofs are added in careful margins. Geometry becomes not just a foundation, but a living language, flexible and precise. Archimedes' works rive as well, not fragments, not references in later texts, but complete treatises. His calculations on floating bodies, his musings on infinity, his mechanical inventions. In our timeline, much of this would be lost, rediscovered centuries later through chance and persistence. Here, it is simply their dot waiting, being read, being improved upon. A young engineer studies a diagram of gears and levers and wonders what might happen if steam, that restless force observed in simple toys, could be harnessed more seriously. The scholars of Alexandria are not isolated dreamers. They argue, they disagree, they form schools of thought that rise and fall, but they share something rare: access. When a question arises, someone can walk down a corridor and find a possible answer waiting on a shelf. When a theory fails, it is recorded as such, not erased, but preserved as a warning. Knowledge does not reset every generation. It accumulates. Medicine changes quietly first. Physicians compare notes across cultures. Egyptian surgical practices meet Greek anatomical theory. Indian herbal knowledge finds its way into careful classifications. There are no microscopes yet, no germ theory, but patterns are noticed. Cleanliness matters. Certain wounds heal better when washed. Some illnesses spread through contact. These observations are written down, not dismissed. Over centuries, small improvements stack atop one another, like stones in a careful wall. As the Roman world rises, Alexandria does not fade. Instead, it adapts. Roman administrators see value in knowledge. Engineers trained in Alexandria build aqueducts more efficiently. Roads are planned with better surveying techniques. Concrete formulas are refined using older texts that explain chemical reactions in clearer detail. The empire still stretches thin. It still struggles, but it carries with it a deeper memory of how things work. When political winds shift, the library learns to bend instead of break. It is no longer a single building, but a network. Copies are sent inland, upriver, across borders. Knowledge is duplicated deliberately, not accidentally. The idea that wisdom must be centralized gives way to the understanding that survival depends on distribution. Fires may still happen. Wars still rage. But no single spark can erase everything. Religion enters the picture slowly, gently, the way it always has. Philosophers debate theology without urgency. Texts from early Christian thinkers are collected alongside pagan works, not as enemies, but as voices in a larger conversation. This coexistence changes tone. Arguments soften. Extremes are documented, but countered with reasoned critique preserved in ink. Dogma finds less fertile ground when alternative ideas are always close at hand. As centuries drift by, something subtle happens. The so-called Dark Ages never grow quite as dark. Europe still fractures. Empires fall. Life remains hard for most people. But monasteries are not the sole keepers of literacy. Copies from Alexandria, filtered through Byzantium and the Islamic world, continue to circulate. Scholars in Baghdad correspond with those in Egypt, comparing star charts, refining calendars. Algebra grows from earlier Greek mathematics instead of reinventing itself from fragments. The Islamic Golden Age, in this timeline, is even more luminous, not because it replaces lost knowledge, but because it builds directly upon it. Translation movements become collaborative projects rather than rescue missions. Astronomers correct Ptolemy earlier. Earth's circumference, already calculated with surprising accuracy in antiquity, is refined further. Maps grow more reliable. Sailors trust them. Exploration becomes less guesswork, more science. Back in Alexandria, the library has changed form again. It is no longer merely shelves and scrolls. It is workshops, observatories, gardens where plants from distant lands are grown and studied. Scholars here do not see theory and practice as separate worlds. A text on mechanics leads directly to a device being built. A philosophical question about nature inspires an experiment with water flow or air pressure. Steam returns to the story, quietly persistent. Hero of Alexandria's simple Eulipoli is not dismissed as a novelty. Instead, it is studied, improved, used to demonstrate principles of motion and force. Over generations, someone connects the dots between steam pressure and rotary motion in a practical way. Not an industrial revolution overnight, just a series of small machines that do specific tasks. Pumping water, turning mills, reducing human labor in dangerous places. This does not create a modern world suddenly. It creates a slightly less fragile one. Cities manage sanitation better. Mines are ventilated. Ships are built with more consistent designs based on accumulated data, rather than tradition alone. When mistakes happen, they are recorded. When successes occur, they are analyzed. Education changes too. Children of merchants and craftsmen gain access to simplified texts derived from Alexandrian originals. Literacy spreads slowly but steadily. Not everyone reads Plato, but many understand basic arithmetic, geometry, and natural philosophy. Superstition does not vanish, but it is challenged gently by familiarity with explanation. As the sun sets over the Nile, casting long reflections across the water, the library endures not as a monument, but as a habit of writing things down, of checking sources, of caring whether something is true. That habit is its greatest invention. And in this alternate history, it survives long enough to seed the world with a different relationship to the past. Empires will still rise and fall. Plagues will still come. Human nature does not change easily, but when recovery begins, it begins from a higher baseline. Less has been forgotten. More can be remembered. And the quiet halls of Alexandria continue to whisper, even as centuries roll onward. That knowledge is not meant to be hoarded or feared, but tended like a garden, patiently and with care. And as night deepens around you now, as breathing slows and thoughts begin to drift. Remember that history itself is a library. Some shelves are damaged, some volumes are missing. But in this gentle branch of time, far from flames and forgetting, the doors were never fully closed. The night deepens now, and the city of Alexandria breathes in a slower rhythm. Lamps flicker softly behind stone walls. The sea murmurs against the harbor, as it always has, indifferent to human ambition, yet quietly shaping it. In this preserved thread of history, the library does not stand apart from the world. It grows older alongside it, accumulating not only texts, but habits, customs, and a way of thinking that settles gently into the bones of civilizations. As centuries slide forward, the library becomes less a place and more a process. The old papyrus scrolls still exist, carefully wrapped and catalogued. But parchment and early bound volumes slowly appear, sturdier, easier to transport. Librarians are no longer simply caretakers. They are editors, translators, and guardians of context. They understand something subtle yet powerful. Knowledge without explanation can be just as fragile as knowledge without protection. So margins fill with notes. Introductions are added. Arguments are summarized. The past is not allowed to speak alone. It is given companions. In one quiet chamber, a scholar copies a work attributed to Aristotle, but pauses. He has read critiques preserved alongside it, written generations earlier by thinkers who disagreed respectfully. Rather than choosing one voice, he preserves them all. This habit spreads. Disagreement becomes documented rather than erased. Over time, this creates a cultural muscle for nuance. People grow accustomed to complexity. Simple answers feel incomplete. The Roman Empire, vast and restless, absorbs this way of thinking unevenly. Some administrators see it as impractical. Others embrace it eagerly. In cities connected by trade routes, copies of Alexandrian texts circulate among engineers, physicians, and teachers. A Roman doctor treating soldiers on a distant frontier carries a small collection of medical notes derived from centuries of accumulated observation. He notices patterns others might have missed. Certain fevers respond better to isolation. Certain wounds worsen in damp conditions. His successes are written back to Alexandria, folded into the greater archive. When Rome eventually fractures, as all empires do, something unusual happens. Knowledge does not fracture in the same way, because it was never centralized completely, because it was copied and recopied deliberately. Fragments survive intact across regions. Constantinople maintains close ties with Alexandria. Scholars travel between them, exchanging ideas as naturally as merchants exchange goods. When political borders harden, intellectual ones remain strangely porous. Further east, centers of learning blossom with confidence rather than urgency. Baghdad, Damascus, and later Cordoba do not see themselves as rescuers of a lost past, but as partners in an ongoing conversation. Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian works coexist in the same libraries. Translation becomes an art form. Translators argue over the best word choices late into the night, aware that a single phrase can shape understanding for generations. Mathematics evolves steadily. Instead of isolated breakthroughs separated by centuries of silence, There is continuity. Euclid's geometry remains foundational, but it is no longer final. Algebra grows alongside it, not as a replacement, but as an extension. Negative numbers, once philosophically troubling, become accepted through careful explanation preserved in commentary texts. 0, already known in the East, spreads westward earlier, and with less resistance, its usefulness made undeniable by practical examples collected over time. Astronomy becomes quieter and more precise. Star catalogues are updated regularly. Old observations are not discarded when new ones arise. They are compared. Differences are analyzed. Gradually, inconsistencies in geocentric models become harder to ignore. The Earth-centered universe does not collapse in dramatic rebellion. It erodes gently under the weight of careful measurement. By the time heliocentric ideas surface, they are framed not as heresy, but as solutions to lingering problems documented for centuries. This changes how conflict unfolds. There are still disputes. There are still moments of suppression. But the record exists. Arguments for and against new ideas are preserved side by side. Later generations can see not only who was right, but why resistance existed in the first place. This historical empathy softens future debates. People learn that disagreement is not always ignorance. Sometimes it is fear, sometimes habit, sometimes a lack of tools. Medicine continues its slow transformation. Without microscopes, understanding remains limited, but patterns accumulate. Quarantine practices emerge earlier. Hospitals are designed with ventilation in mind. Simple public health measures, supported by centuries of recorded outcomes, become common in larger cities. Plagues still occur. They always will. But recovery is faster. The idea that disease has natural causes, rather than purely supernatural ones, gains quiet acceptance. Philosophy, too, deepens rather than fragments. Stoicism, Epicureanism, Aristotelian logic, and emerging theological frameworks are not locked in competition. They are cross-referenced. A philosopher writing on ethics can easily consult earlier debates on human nature, law, and emotion. Over time, moral philosophy becomes less rigid, more observational. Ethics are discussed in terms of outcomes as well as intentions, a habit shaped by generations of recorded case studies. As the medieval period unfolds, it does not feel like a rupture. Life remains difficult for most. Technology advances slowly, but there is a sense of continuity that hums beneath the surface. Cathedrals are built with better understanding of load-bearing structures, informed by preserved engineering texts. Bridges last longer. Buildings collapse less often. Each success reinforces trust in accumulated knowledge. The library's influence becomes increasingly subtle. It is no longer necessary to mention Alexandria explicitly. Its fingerprints are everywhere, in how texts are cited, in how arguments are constructed, in how uncertainty is acknowledged rather than denied. This creates a cultural patience that shapes innovation. New ideas are tested slowly. Failures are documented carefully. Progress feels less like sudden leaps and more like steady breathing. Navigation improves earlier than in our familiar timeline. Mariners have access to more accurate star charts and geographic estimates. The circumference of the Earth calculated with surprising precision in antiquity, is refined further. Errors shrink. Maps become less symbolic and more practical. Long-distance voyages are still risky, but less blind. When explorers set sail, they do so with confidence grounded in recorded experience rather than legend. This has consequences. Encounters between distant cultures still involve conflict, misunderstanding, and exploitation. Human nature remains stubborn, but there is also more curiosity, more documentation. Early ethnographic accounts, influenced by Alexandrian habits, attempt to describe rather than dismiss. Some explorers return not only with gold and stories, but with questions, recorded carefully for others to examine. Printing arrives not as a revolution, but as an amplification. When movable type spreads, it plugs into an existing culture of citation and preservation. Errors are corrected across editions. Marginal notes migrate into footnotes. Readers become accustomed to seeing sources. Authority shifts subtly from individuals to networks of corroborated texts. Religious thought adapts again. Sacred texts are studied with historical awareness preserved from earlier centuries. Literalism exists, but it competes openly with contextual interpretation supported by documented linguistic and cultural analysis. Schisms still occur. Faith remains powerful, but the presence of long intellectual memory tempers extremes. The past is always visible, whispering caution. As industry begins to stir, it does so under different conditions. Early machines are informed by centuries-old mechanical principles refined continuously. Water power and steam are applied incrementally. Safety improves faster. Workers still suffer, but catastrophic failures are less common. Designs are tested against known data rather than intuition alone. Science, as a concept, emerges gradually. There is no single moment when the scientific method is born. Instead, it feels like a long habit of writing things down, testing them, and comparing results. Experiments are described in detail so others can repeat them. This practice, rooted in Alexandrian tradition, becomes normal rather than revolutionary. Wars still reshape borders. Empires still rise and fall. But even after destruction, reconstruction is informed by memory. Cities rebuilt after conflict consult old plans. Agricultural recovery draws on recorded knowledge of soil, seasons, and crop rotation. Famine still strikes, but mitigation strategies exist, preserved and adaptable. As night stretches on, imagine a scholar centuries after the founding of the library, sitting beneath a different roof, in a different land, reading a text that traces its lineage back to those marble halls by the sea. He does not feel awe so much as familiarity. This is how the world has always worked for him. Knowledge accumulates. It does not vanish without trace. This alternate history does not eliminate suffering. It does not create utopia. What it offers instead is resilience. A world slightly better at remembering, slightly slower to forget hard-won lessons, slightly more capable of learning from itself. And as the hours pass quietly around you now, as thoughts drift and the weight of the day loosens its grip, the idea settles gently. Perhaps the greatest loss was never any single invention or formula, but the habit of continuity itself. In this imagined branch of time, that habit survived, and from it, everything else followed. one careful page at a time. The world keeps turning, slowly, patiently, as it always has. Night gives way to morning somewhere far away, while here, in the quiet space between waking and sleep, history continues its gentle unfolding. In this preserved timeline, the inheritance of Alexandria has settled so deeply into human culture that few remember where it began. Like a river whose source lies beyond sight, its influence is felt long after its origins fade from memory. By the early modern centuries, scholars no longer speak of recovering ancient wisdom. There is nothing to recover. Instead, they speak of refinement, correction, expansion. Libraries across continents maintain shared catalogues, referencing one another through careful correspondence. Letters travel slowly, but they travel reliably. When a scholar in Florence questions a mathematical assumption, his critique is copied, sent east, and answered months later by someone who has access to centuries of commentary. This creates a different intellectual temperament. Fame matters less than accuracy. A name attached to an idea carries weight, but not final authority. Everyone knows that even the most respected thinkers of the past were revised by those who followed. Margins filled with corrections are not seen as disrespect. They are seen as participation in a long conversation. Art changes under this influence. Perspective, anatomy, and light are studied earlier and more precisely, informed by preserved treatises on optics and human proportion. Painters learn not only by observation, but by reading debates on how the eye perceives depth and color. The result is not hyperrealism, but intentionality. Artists know why certain techniques work. Architecture follows a similar path. Domes rise with confidence grounded in accumulated structural knowledge. Failures are fewer, and when they happen, they are analyzed rather than attributed to fate. The relationship between science and craft tightens. Artisans keep notebooks. Builders record measurements. Shipwrights document hull shapes and performance. These records find their way into formal archives. Over time, the line between scholar and worker blurs. Practical knowledge gains intellectual respect. Theory earns its place by usefulness as much as elegance. This shift subtly alters social structures. Guilds evolve into learning communities. Apprenticeship includes reading as well as doing. Literacy becomes more widespread not because of ideology, but because it proves useful. A farmer who can read almanacs based on centuries of weather records farms more successfully. A merchant who understands basic accounting principles avoids ruin. Knowledge trickles downward, not evenly, but steadily. Political philosophy develops with unusual self-awareness. Thinkers have access to detailed records of past governments, their successes and failures preserved without romantic gloss. Republics, monarchies, and empires are compared analytically. Arguments for governance styles cite data as well as ideals. Revolutions still occur, driven by inequality and resentment, but they are framed by historical consciousness. Leaders know how previous uprisings unraveled. Some mistakes are avoided, others repeat, stubborn as ever. The age of exploration unfolds with greater deliberation. Expeditions are planned using accumulated geographic knowledge rather than myth. Encounters with new lands still bring exploitation and tragedy. That part of humanity does not vanish, but documentation is fuller. Early reports include linguistic notes, ecological observations, and attempts to understand local governance. These records do not prevent injustice, but they preserve truth. Later generations cannot easily claim ignorance. Natural philosophy edges closer to something recognizably scientific. The habit of experiment spreads. Observations are logged meticulously. Failed experiments are recorded alongside successful ones. Reducing repetition of error, instruments improve incrementally. Lenses are ground with guidance from preserved optical theory. Telescopes emerge earlier, not as sudden marvels, but as logical extensions of long understood principles. With better telescopes comes a quieter cosmic shift. The heavens no longer appear immutable. Spots on the sun, moons around distant planets. The universe grows larger and more dynamic. Religious interpretations adapt unevenly. Some resist, others incorporate new findings into broader theological frameworks, already accustomed to historical nuance. Conflict exists, but it lacks the sharp edge of surprise. The idea that understanding evolves is already familiar. Energy becomes a focal point. Water wheels grow more efficient. Windmills are redesigned using accumulated aerodynamic insight. Steam, long studied in controlled settings, begins to find broader application. Not in massive factories at first, but in targeted uses. Pumping water from mines, powering bellows, turning small mills where geography allows. Each success is recorded, refined, and shared. Urban life changes subtly. Sanitation improves. Streets are planned with drainage in mind. Public works draw on centuries of engineering texts preserved and annotated. Disease still stalks cities, but responses are faster and more organized. Statistical thinking begins to emerge organically as people notice patterns in recorded data. Numbers tell stories. Those stories inform policy. Education expands beyond elite circles. Universities resemble networks rather than isolated towers. Curricula evolve slowly, anchored in preserved texts, but open to revision. Students learn not just conclusions, but how conclusions were reached and challenged. This produces graduates less enamored with certainty and more comfortable with process. As industries grow, labor movements rise earlier, informed by historical records of unrest and reform. Arguments for fair treatment cite not only moral philosophy, but documented outcomes. Productivity, stability, and health are framed as interconnected. Progress is uneven and contested, but the conversation is richer. Global exchange accelerates. Trade routes carry not just goods, but books. Translations proliferate. A scholar in East Asia reads a European treatise built on Alexandrian foundations, while adding commentary rooted in local philosophy. Knowledge becomes braided, not hierarchical. No single center dominates completely. The idea of progress itself shifts. It is no longer seen as a march toward perfection, but as maintenance, keeping systems functional, preventing loss. The greatest fear is not stagnation, but forgetting. This fear, inherited from the near myth of Alexandria's vulnerability, shapes priorities. Archives are funded, redundancy is valued, copies are cherished. As the centuries continue their slow turning, The world remains imperfect, conflicted, and fragile. But it is also more self-aware. Humanity remembers more of its own experiments, its own errors. That memory acts like ballast, keeping the ship of civilization from capsizing too easily when storms arrive. Now, as the quiet deepens again around you, imagine shelves stretching far beyond sight, filled not only with ancient scrolls, but with the layered thoughts of countless generations. Imagine hands, long gone, passing knowledge forward with care. In this timeline, the library was never just a building. It was a promise that learning, once begun, would not be allowed to vanish without a trace. And as sleep pulls gently at the edges of consciousness, that promise lingers, soft and steady. Like the sound of waves against a distant shore, time moves forward now with a softer rhythm, like footsteps on sand rather than stone. Generations rise and fade, each leaving behind quiet traces of thought, observation, and experience. In this world shaped by continuity rather than rupture, the long memory of Alexandria has altered something subtle but profound. Humanity no longer believes that knowledge is fragile by nature. Instead, it believes fragility comes from neglect. By the late early modern era, this belief has taken root deeply enough to shape institutions. Archives are built with the same care once reserved for fortresses. Fireproof vaults, stone walls, careful separation of originals and copies. Scholars speak openly about redundancy, about the necessity of preserving not just answers, but the paths taken to reach them. Failure, documented honestly, becomes a resource rather than a shame. Philosophers begin to speak of time differently. History is not a series of isolated ages, but a continuous experiment. Thinkers studying ethics draw upon centuries of recorded human behavior. They notice patterns, repeating across cultures and eras. Power concentrates, corruption follows, reform stabilizes. Briefly, then the cycle begins again. These observations do not eliminate injustice, but they inform resistance. Reformers argue not from hope alone, but from evidence. Economics emerges quietly as a field of study. Trade records, preserved meticulously, allow patterns to surface. Scarcity, surplus, inflation, and speculation are discussed not as mysteries, but as phenomena with historical precedent. Governments make fewer catastrophic mistakes, not because leaders are wiser, but because warnings are preserved in ink, waiting to be read. Technology continues its steady, unglamorous climb. Steam engines grow more efficient, guided by generations of thermodynamic insight accumulated. Slowly from ancient observations of heat, pressure, and motion, factories appear, but with design philosophies influenced by long-standing engineering ethics. Ventilation, safety mechanisms, and workflow are considered early. Accidents still occur, but fewer are dismissed as unavoidable. Cities swell. Urban planners consult old maps and treatises. Green spaces are incorporated deliberately, inspired by ancient writings on health and environment. Water systems improve. Waste is managed more systematically. Public health becomes a civic responsibility grounded in recorded outcomes rather than superstition. Education becomes increasingly universal, though uneven. Basic literacy spreads widely. Textbooks are They not static. They are revised regularly, with annotations explaining why changes were made. Students grow accustomed to the idea that understanding evolves. Certainty is provisional. This shapes political discourse. Citizens expect arguments to be supported by precedent and data. Rhetoric alone loses some of its power. The sciences branch and deepen. Biology advances through careful classification and long-term observation. Evolutionary ideas surface earlier, framed cautiously, supported by fossil records and comparative anatomy preserved across centuries. Resistance exists, but debate is informed rather than reactionary. The shock of the new is softened by the familiarity of change. Physics matures methodically. Laws of motion, refined from ancient mechanics, are tested repeatedly. Mathematical notation evolves for clarity. Calculus emerges not as a sudden leap, but as the inevitable formalization of long-standing methods. Its development is smoother, less controversial, because its roots are visible in preserved texts. Communication accelerates. Postal systems expand. Printing becomes cheaper. Pamphlets circulate widely, but alongside them circulate responses, corrections, and contextual essays. Misinformation exists, but it is countered more quickly by a culture accustomed to verification. Trust shifts from authority to process. As global networks tighten, cultures interact more deeply. Linguistics flourishes as a discipline. Scholars compare grammar structures across languages, seeking universals. This fosters empathy, however imperfect. Differences are studied rather than feared. Cultural exchange remains unequal, but understanding grows incrementally. Political revolutions still erupt. Old orders resist change. Violence occurs. Yet even in upheaval, there is memory. Revolutionary leaders consult histories of past revolutions. Some strategies are adjusted. Excesses are documented in real time, limiting later myth-making. History remains honest, if not always kind. The industrial age unfolds with fewer blind spots. Environmental impact is noticed earlier, documented in careful records of air, water, and soil quality. Warnings appear sooner. Responses are slow, contested, and imperfect. But awareness exists. The idea that human activity shapes the planet is not shocking. It is already familiar, as electricity is harnessed. It joins a lineage of energy technologies, rather than replacing them abruptly. Grids are designed with redundancy in mind. Failures are studied. Improvements follow. Urban nights glow softly, extending productive hours, but also raising questions about rest, health, and balance. These questions are debated with reference to ancient discussions of human rhythm and nature. The library's spirit persists even as its physical form transforms beyond recognition. No single building now holds its essence. Instead, it lives in protocols, in citation standards, in peer review, in the expectation that claims must be traceable. Alexandria has become invisible precisely because it succeeded. As the modern world approaches, it does so with a longer shadow behind it. Nations define themselves not only by territory, but by archives. Cultural heritage includes libraries as much as monuments. War still threatens knowledge. But protection of archives becomes a strategic priority. Armies are instructed to safeguard records where possible. Loss is mourned publicly, understood as a wound to humanity itself. In quieter moments, scholars reflect on how close everything once came to vanishing. They read accounts of near disasters, floods narrowly avoided, fires extinguished in time, political edicts reversed. These stories are taught as cautionary tales. Memory requires vigilance. Now, as your own thoughts begin to slow again, imagine the weight of that vigilance carried gently across. As centuries, imagine people choosing, again and again, to copy a text one more time, to store it a little more carefully, to pass it forward without knowing who might need it. In this world, the Library of Alexandria never burned, and because of that, humanity learned, slowly and imperfectly, how not to burn its own memories so easily. Let that idea rest quietly with you now, like embers kept warm rather than allowed to flare. The hours drift by almost unnoticed now, like pages flipping in a cozy, dimly lit room. In this timeless world, the modern age doesn't crash in with a bang. It slips in quietly, almost like a gentle sigh. Humanity takes a moment to look around and realizes, hey, we've been here before. Different faces, sure, but the same old questions about power, responsibility, and the heavy burden of knowledge that we carry forward. By the time we reach this contemporary era, the legacy of Alexandria has woven itself so deeply into our global culture that we hardly even name it anymore. It just exists in the air we breathe. You know, those ideas we take for granted, like the belief that knowledge should be shared, or that we should always double-check our claims. And let's not forget, forgetting is a choice, not something that just happens to us. These thoughts shape how countries cooperate, often in ways we don't even notice. Think about it. Early scientific societies break down borders like they're nothing. Conferences feel more like friendly chats than cutthroat competitions. Sure, priorities matter, but so does clarity. When medicine steps into this new phase, it's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, informed by centuries of recorded practice. Germ theory pops up, and instead of people freaking out, there's this sense of cautious curiosity. Ancient records of plagues line up perfectly with new microscopic findings. It's almost like the leap from old to new feels shorter than we thought. Public health systems start adapting faster, too. Vaccination campaigns are built on a foundation of trust in documented outcomes. Thanks to a history that's fresh in everyone's minds. Sure, there's some resistance, but it's not widespread. It's like people remember the pain of preventable suffering, and that makes them more open to change. Engineering, oh boy, it takes off. Infrastructure projects draw from a treasure trove of past attempts. Bridges are tested against historical stress data, while dams are designed with the lessons learned from ancient failures etched into their blueprints. Sure, catastrophic collapses still happen, but they're not just tragedies. They become case studies in human limitation and adaptation. Each failure turns into a chapter in this ever-growing book of what we can learn from our mistakes. Innovation speeds up, but it's like there's this unusual restraint. New technologies come into play, but not without some serious thought. Impact assessments become the norm. A habit passed down through generations of careful documentation. Ethical discussions don't just tag along after the fact. They're right there at the table with invention. This doesn't mean harm is completely avoided, but at least we're not stumbling around in the dark anymore. Societies have a clearer idea of what they're risking. Information networks explode. Telegraphs, telephones, and later, digital systems blend seamlessly into existing frameworks of record keeping. Archives transition smoothly into new formats, like they were always meant to be. Redundancy becomes a guiding principle. Data gets copied across different media and stored in multiple spots. The fear of loss is still there, but it's managed through habit, not panic. Education transforms into a lifelong journey. The notion that learning stops when you hit adulthood feels so outdated. Adults dive back into study regularly, flipping through updated editions of foundational texts. Knowledge isn't something you just grab once and hold onto for dear life. It's something you revisit, revise, and sometimes even let go of. This shift creates a culture that's more open to change and less afraid of being corrected. How cool is that? Global conflicts still scar the century. Wars break out. Ideologies clash. Technology amplifies. Destruction. Yet even amid devastation, there is a quieter effort to protect memory. Libraries are evacuated. Archives are digitized early. International agreements prioritize cultural preservation. After conflicts end, rebuilding includes restoring records alongside buildings. Environmental awareness deepens. Long-term climate records, preserved meticulously across centuries, reveal patterns too clear to ignore. Industrial growth is balanced, imperfectly, with conservation. Debates are fierce, but informed. The planet is understood as a system, not a backdrop. Ancient texts on land management and water stewardship find renewed relevance. Guiding modern policy, the digital age arrives as a culmination rather than a rupture. Networks mirror the old Alexandrian dream of universal knowledge, scaled unimaginably larger. Search systems are designed with context in mind. Sources are traceable. Annotations flourish. Misinformation still spreads, but it meets a populace trained to question gently and verify patiently. Artificial intelligence emerges within this culture of continuity. It is framed not as replacement, but as extension. Systems are trained on well-curated archives, rich with context and correction. Ethical frameworks draw on centuries of philosophical debate preserved intact. Concerns are addressed openly, documented carefully for future generations to learn from. As humanity reaches outward, toward space, it carries with it the same habits. Missions are planned using accumulated, astronomical knowledge stretching back millennia. Failures are recorded meticulously. Successes are contextualized within long historical arcs. Exploration feels less like conquest and more like conversation with the unknown. Through it all, the absence of a single catastrophic loss echoes quietly. There was no great forgetting, no sudden plunge into silence. Instead, there was the steady hum of continuity, imperfect but persistent. Civilization stumbles, but it remembers how to stand again. Now, as your breathing evens out and the edges of wakefulness blur, Imagine one last time the halls of that ancient library by the sea, not frozen in marble, but alive in every archive, every database, every shared document. Imagine scholars, long gone, smiling softly at the idea that their careful copying mattered. In this world, the Library of Alexandria never burned, and because of that, humanity learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, how to carry its past forward without dropping it quite so often. Let that thought fade gently now, like ink soaking into papyrus, leaving its mark quietly and permanently. The night has grown very still now, the kind of stillness where even thoughts begin to move more slowly, drifting rather than marching. In this calm stretch of imagined time, the long story we have been following reaches its quiet maturity. Not an ending, but a settling. A deep breath taken after centuries of careful listening. In this world shaped by remembrance, humanity eventually becomes conscious of its own continuity. Not in a dramatic declaration, but in small realizations repeated across disciplines. A historian notices that modern debates echo arguments recorded 2,000 years earlier, almost word for word. A physicist traces a formula back through layers of commentary to a diagram sketched in charcoal on papyrus. A physician recognizes a treatment protocol as a refined descendant of ancient notes on healing wounds by the Nile. This awareness does not breed arrogance. If anything, it humbles. People begin to see themselves not as pioneers standing at the edge of the unknown, but as caretakers walking a long path already marked with footprints. Innovation continues, but it is framed as contribution rather than conquest. Each new idea is placed gently onto a growing stack, not hurled aside once it ages. Cultural memory becomes a form of shared identity. Nations still differ, languages still diverge, beliefs still clash. But beneath these differences runs a common understanding that humanity has been asking the same questions for a very long time. What is a good life? How should power be used? What do we owe to those who come after us? The answers shift, but the questions remain recognizable. Education reflects this maturity. Children learn history not as a list of dates, but as a chain of decisions and consequences. They are taught to read primary sources early, to feel the texture of past voices rather than receiving polished summaries alone. Mistakes of earlier generations are not hidden. They are studied openly, treated as warnings rather than embarrassments. Art grows contemplative. Music carries echoes of ancient modes refined through centuries of theory. Literature leans into layered storytelling, comfortable with ambiguity. Writers know their work will be read alongside commentary and response. They write with patience, trusting future readers to engage deeply. Even entertainment reflects this long view. Stories favor slow arcs over sudden twists. Audiences appreciate foreshadowing, subtlety, and thematic depth. The taste for spectacle exists, but it is balanced by a love of quiet meaning. This cultural patience traces its lineage back to the habit of long reading, nurtured by generations who valued preserved texts. As technology advances further, speed increases, but not at the expense of memory. Systems are designed with built-in archives. Updates preserve earlier versions. Deletions require justification. The fear of irreversible loss lingers like a soft echo from an ancient near disaster that everyone knows even if they no longer remember the details. Global governance remains imperfect, but dialogue is richer. International disputes cite historical analogues carefully. Treaties include clauses informed by centuries of precedent. When failures occur, they are analyzed with brutal honesty and stored for reference. The idea that future generations will read today's decisions tempers excess. Space exploration becomes humanity's newest library. Data from distant probes is preserved with meticulous care. Star maps are updated, annotated, and cross-referenced with ancient observations. The sky, once charted from Alexandria's rooftops, is now explored physically, yet treated with the same reverence. Curiosity remains, but so does caution. There is, eventually, a moment when scholars formally acknowledge what has been quietly true all along. The preservation of knowledge itself has been humanity's greatest technology, more impactful than any engine or algorithm, more enduring than any empire. This realization does not come with celebration. It comes with resolve. Resources are devoted to safeguarding memory against every imaginable threat. Natural disasters, political upheaval, technological decay. Knowledge is stored across continents in multiple formats, continually refreshed. The idea of a single point of failure is considered an ethical flaw. And yet, despite all this care, people understand something else too. That preservation is not perfection. Bias remains. Voices are still missed. Power still shapes what is recorded. The difference now is awareness. Marginalized perspectives are actively sought, documented, and preserved. The archive grows more inclusive, more honest over time. As humanity looks back across its own long record, it does not see a straight line of progress. It sees a tapestry, bright threads of insight woven through darker stretches of error and harm. The value lies not in pretending otherwise, but in seeing the whole pattern. Now, as your body grows heavier and your thoughts soften into half-formed images, return one last time to that ancient shoreline. The Mediterranean is calm. The air is warm. Somewhere, long ago, a scribe dipped a reed into ink and copied a line of text, unaware of how far it would travel through time. In this imagined world, that line was never lost. It was read, questioned, corrected, and passed on. Again and again, quietly, patiently, until it became part of something far larger than itself. The Library of Alexandria never burned here, and because it did not, humanity learned a gentle lesson that took millennia to absorb. That knowledge survives not through brilliance alone, but through care, through repetition, through the simple act of remembering to remember. Let that thought fade with you now, as sleep takes hold, slow and steady, like the turning of an endless page. The world has grown very quiet now, not empty, but hushed, as though history itself has lowered its voice out of respect for sleep. In this final stretch of our wandering, time loosens its grip entirely. Centuries no longer rush past. They settle. They rest beside one another, like books returned gently to familiar shelves. In this preserved timeline, humanity eventually reaches a strange and comforting realization. There is no final chapter, no moment when knowledge is complete. The long survival of Alexandria's spirit has taught something essential. Understanding is not a destination. It is a practice, one that must be renewed by every generation, no matter how advanced the tools become. People come to see that forgetting is more dangerous than ignorance. Ignorance can be addressed. It can be studied, documented, and corrected. Forgetting leaves no trace to follow back. It erases context. It severs cause from effect. And so, remembrance becomes a shared moral responsibility, as natural as teaching language to children or caring for the elderly. Libraries evolve once more. They are no longer just repositories of human thought. They become living institutions designed to teach how knowledge was formed. Visitors do not merely read conclusions. They trace debates. They watch ideas change shape across time. Young students see that certainty is always provisional. That confidence without humility has historically led to harm. Artificial systems trained to assist human thinking inherit these values. They are designed not to obscure complexity, but to reveal it. When asked for answers, they provide histories. When asked for certainty, they provide probabilities and context. This design philosophy traces directly back to Alexandrian habits. Never separate knowledge from its lineage. Cultural memory deepens further. Rituals of remembrance expand beyond wars and leaders. Societies commemorate discoveries, corrections, and even acknowledged mistakes. Museums display failed theories alongside successful ones, explaining why they once seemed convincing. Visitors leave with a quieter respect for the difficulty of understanding reality. As humanity settles into this mature phase, ambition does not disappear. Exploration continues. Creation continues. But it is softened by perspective. People know how easily brilliance can be undone by neglect. They know how much effort it took to keep the chain unbroken. That knowledge encourages patience. Even conflict changes its tone. Disagreements still arise. They always will. But arguments increasingly reference shared archives rather than isolated narratives. Lies struggle to survive long in a world trained to cross-check gently but relentlessly. Truth remains contested, but it is anchored. There comes a moment, not marked by ceremony, when a scholar writes a reflection that spreads quietly across the world. It states something simple, that the greatest miracle of human history was not invention, but transmission. Not discovery, but preservation. The idea resonates because everyone recognizes it as already true. And so the story circles back, as stories often do, to the sea, to Alexandria's harbor, where ships once arrived heavy with scrolls, ideas, and questions. In this world, that harbor never closed. It widened. It became metaphorical. Every port, every server, every classroom inherited its function. The original building is long gone now, transformed, rebuilt, repurposed countless times. Stones eroded, walls collapsed and rose again. But its purpose outlived its form. The library was never really about marble or papyrus. It was about choosing not to let voices vanish. As you rest now, balanced gently between wakefulness and sleep, imagine the soft sound of pages turning somewhere far away. Imagine lamplight glowing steadily through the night. Imagine countless hands, across centuries, performing the same quiet act. Reading. Writing. Preserving. In this alternate history, the Library of Alexandria never burned. And because of that, humanity learned something rare. That progress is fragile, yes, but memory makes it resilient. That civilization survives not by racing forward, but by holding on. We've wandered these infinite paths tonight, through halls that never fell silent, through timelines where knowledge was allowed to age gracefully instead of vanishing in smoke. And now, it's time to let the story rest, just as you do. If you enjoy drifting through this long dream of history, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. History stretches across all of it, quietly waiting to be remembered again. Sleep tight, my friend. Dream sweet dreams and wake up refreshed tomorrow. The story does not truly end. It never has. It only grows quieter, like those soft footsteps fading down a long corridor after the lamps have been dimmed. This final passage isn't about new centuries or fresh inventions. It's about that stillness that settles in after you truly understand something. You know, that calm. That comes when nothing more needs to be proven. It's like a sigh of relief. In this world shaped by remembrance, people eventually stop asking what might have been lost. They realize that loss isn't the defining wound. Instead, they start to wonder how care was maintained for so long. Think about it. Ordinary people, generation after generation, choosing patience over urgency, valuing continuity over flashy spectacles. It's pretty incredible, right? Historians diving into the ancient world notice something unusual. Sure, great leaps still happen, but they're fewer and far between. Progress feels smoother, less jagged. There are no dramatic renaissances born from rediscovery because nothing was truly buried. The absence of sudden rebirth makes history feel less theatrical, but way more humane. Growth happens the way trees grow ring by ring, quietly and steadily, of course. There are still myths. Humans need them. They give us stories to hold onto. But these myths now coexist with footnotes. Legends are preserved alongside corrections. Stories can be beautiful without pretending they're literal. This balance, it becomes our cultural instinct. Wonder isn't diminished by understanding, it's actually deepened. Late at night, you can imagine scholars pondering what might have happened if things had gone differently. What if a fire had spread? What if wars had been less restrained? These counterfactuals are treated gently, like shadows on the wall, not to frighten us, but to remind us that vigilance matters. Memory requires effort, after all. So, across the world, small rituals continue. Archives are checked, files refreshed, texts recopied into new formats, not out of fear, but out of habit, the kind of habit Alexandria taught best. Now, as this long journey finally releases you, let your mind rest in that image. A lamp still burning, a page still legible, a thought still reaching forward through time. History is patient. It waits for us to listen. Good night.
Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People shivered at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal we are afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe Cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human were no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to cool lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in a human history. This, thank you. Today, now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of Fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools, the iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal we are afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human, we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world. From Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities we are born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in a human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.